June 17, 1972. 5 men in business suits and surgical gloves break into an office building in Washington, D.C. They carry cameras, wiretapping equipment, and cash that cannot be traced. What they don't know is that a security guard has already noticed the tape on a basement door. This single break-in will destroy a presidency and change America forever. The Watergate scandal began as a burglary at the Democratic National Committee headquarters inside the Watergate office complex in Washington, D.C. What seemed like a simple crime quickly unraveled into a massive conspiracy that reached the highest levels of American government. President Richard Nixon and his closest advisors were accused of covering up the break-in, destroying evidence, and abusing presidential power to obstruct justice. The scandal matters today because it established a precedent. It showed that no one, not even a president, stands above the law. Watergate created new rules about executive power, government transparency, and the role of a free press in holding leaders accountable. The story begins not with the break-in, but with paranoia. By 1971, President Richard Nixon had become obsessed with political enemies and press leaks, Nixon Library Archives. His administration created a secret group called the Plumbers, whose job was to stop information from leaking to journalists. The team included former CIA officer E. Howard Hunt and former FBI agent G. Gordon Liddy. In early 1972, Nixon's re-election campaign approved a plan called Operation Gemstone. The plan included breaking into Democratic offices to photograph documents and plant listening devices. Senate Watergate Committee Report, 1974. The goal was to gather intelligence that could help Nixon defeat his opponents in the upcoming election. On May 28, 1972, the Plumbers successfully broke into the Watergate complex and installed wiretaps on 2 phones, but the equipment didn't work properly. The team needed to go back. On June 17, 1972, 5 burglars returned to the Watergate building just after midnight. Security guard Frank Wills noticed tape covering the locks on several doors. He removed it, but when he returned later and found fresh tape, he called the police. Wills' testimony, 1973. Officers arrested the 5 men inside the Democratic offices. The burglars carried $2,300 in cash, most of it in sequential $100 bills. They also had cameras, lockpicks, and electronic surveillance equipment. Police report, June 17, 1972. 2 other men, Hunt and Liddy, were arrested shortly after for coordinating the break-in. At first, the White House dismissed the incident as a third-rate burglary attempt. Nixon Press Secretary Statement, June 1972. But 2 young reporters at the Washington Post, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, kept digging. They discovered that one burglar's address book contained the name Howard Hunt and the notation WH for White House. Washington Post, June 19, 1972. They found that checks intended for Nixon's re-election campaign had been deposited in the burglar's bank account. A mysterious source they called Deep Throat guided them toward higher levels of the conspiracy. By early 1973, all 7 defendants had been convicted. But federal judge John Sirica wasn't satisfied. He suspected the burglars were protecting more powerful people. Sirica Memoir, 1979. One burglar, James McCord, wrote a letter to Sirica, admitting that the defendants had committed perjury under pressure from the White House. The cover-up was beginning to crack. The Senate created a special committee to investigate. Millions of Americans watched the televised hearings through the summer of 1973. White House counsel John Dean testified that Nixon had personally approved payments to keep the burglars quiet. Dean testimony, June 25, 1973. Former aide Alexander Butterfield revealed something even more explosive. Nixon had secretly recorded every conversation in the Oval Office. The battle for those tapes consumed the next year. Nixon refused to hand them over, claiming executive privilege. Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox demanded them. When Cox wouldn't back down, Nixon ordered Attorney General Elliot Richardson to fire him. Richardson refused and resigned. Deputy Attorney General William Ruckelshaus also refused and was fired. Finally, Solicitor General Robert Bork carried out the order in what became known as the Saturday Night Massacre. October 20th, 1973. The public outcry was immediate. Congress began seriously discussing impeachment. Nixon released edited transcripts of some tapes, but investigators demanded the originals, April 1974. The Supreme Court ruled unanimously that Nixon must turn over the tapes, United States versus Nixon, July 24, 1974. The recordings proved that Nixon had known about the cover-up from the beginning and had actively worked to obstruct the FBI's investigation. On August 5, 1974, Nixon released the smoking gun tape from June 23, 1972, just 6 days after the break-in. In it, Nixon and his chief of staff discussed using the CIA to block the FBI's investigation, White House tape transcripts. Even his strongest supporters in Congress withdrew their backing. Facing certain impeachment and conviction, Richard Nixon resigned on August 9, 1974. He became the only U.S. president ever to resign from office. The case against Nixon rested on multiple types of evidence. The White House tape recordings provided direct proof of the president's involvement in obstruction of justice, National Archives. Court documents and sworn testimony from multiple witnesses, including John Dean, corroborated the audio evidence. Financial records traced money from Nixon's campaign to the burglars' bank accounts, FBI investigation files. However, one critical piece of evidence remains controversial. An 18-and-a-half-minute gap appears in a key tape from June 20, 1972. Nixon's secretary, Rosemary Woods, testified that she may have accidentally erased 5 minutes while transcribing. But technical experts determined the gap resulted from at least 5 separate erasures. Technical Panel Report, 1974. The content of that conversation was never recovered and remains unknown. Multiple White House officials were convicted based on the evidence. Former Attorney General John Mitchell, Chief of Staff H.R. Haldeman, and Domestic Policy Advisor John Ehrlichman all served prison time for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and perjury. Federal Court Records, 1975. The convictions were based on testimony, documents, and the tape recordings. Some defenders of Nixon argued that the break-in itself was a minor incident blown out of proportion by a hostile press. They claimed that similar intelligence-gathering operations were common in political campaigns. Nixon supporters' statements, 1974-1975. Critics responded that the issue wasn't the initial crime, but the systematic abuse of government power to hide it. Questions remain about who ordered the original break-in. While the cover-up clearly reached Nixon, evidence about who initially authorized the Watergate burglary is less definitive. Campaign officials G. Gordon Liddy and Jeb Magruder gave conflicting accounts about whether John Mitchell approved the plan. Testimony variations, 1973-1974. Some historians believe Nixon may not have known about the break-in beforehand, only becoming involved in the cover-up afterward. The identity of Deep Throat remained a mystery for over 30 years. In 2005, former FBI Associate Director Mark Felt revealed himself as Woodward's source, Vanity Fair, 2005. Some praised Felt as a hero who protected democracy. Others criticized him for leaking confidential information instead of working through official channels. The debate reflects larger questions about whistleblowing and loyalty. Nixon himself maintained until his death that he was forced from office by political enemies. In interviews years later, he admitted mistakes in handling the cover-up, but insisted he committed no impeachable offenses. Frost-Nixon Interviews, 1977. Most historians and legal scholars disagree with this assessment, pointing to clear evidence of obstruction of justice. The scandal devastated many lives beyond the obvious political casualties. The 5 burglars and their families endured public shame and prison sentences for following orders from superiors. Security guard Frank Wills, whose vigilance triggered the whole investigation, struggled to find steady work afterward and died nearly homeless in 2000. Obituaries, September 2000. His role in history brought him little personal reward. For millions of Americans, Watergate shattered their trust in government. The 1970s saw a sharp decline in public faith in political institutions. Gallup polling data, 1973-1976. Many citizens who had believed in presidential honesty felt betrayed and cynical. This erosion of trust affected civic engagement and political participation for years. The journalists, investigators, and members of Congress who pursued the truth also paid prices. They faced threats, pressure campaigns, and attempts to discredit them. Some White House officials compiled enemies lists of people to target with tax audits and other government harassment. Dean testimony. Standing up to presidential power required courage and came with real costs. Watergate established a crucial principle in American democracy: accountability. Before Watergate, many assumed presidents operated above normal legal constraints. The scandal proved that evidence, investigation, and legal process could hold even the most powerful accountable constitutional scholars' analyses. Think of it like a stress test for democracy. The system bent under pressure, but didn't break. The scandal transformed how Americans view presidential power. Congress passed new laws limiting executive authority, including the War Powers Resolution and reforms to campaign finance, post-Watergate legislation, 1974-1978. The media became more aggressive in investigating political leaders. Government transparency increased through stronger freedom of information laws. These changes reflected a fundamental shift. Americans decided they needed stronger checks on presidential power. Watergate also created the template for modern political scandals. The suffix "gate" has been attached to countless controversies since 1972. More importantly, the scandal established a pattern. Cover-ups often become worse than original crimes. Investigations can start small and grow large. And public pressure combined with legal process can force accountability. These lessons appear in nearly every major political scandal that followed. Here's what we know for certain. Nixon's re-election campaign approved a break-in at Democratic headquarters. When the burglars got caught, the White House orchestrated a cover-up that included destroyed evidence, hush money payments, and obstruction of justice. Nixon knew about the cover-up, participated in it, and lied about it to the American public. What we don't know is whether Nixon personally ordered the original break-in. We'll never know what was discussed in that 18.5-minute gap. And reasonable people still debate whether Nixon would have been better or worse for America if he had served out his term. But the core truth remains undisputed. When power turned into corruption, the system eventually corrected itself. For understanding Watergate's relevance today, several scenarios emerge. High confidence. Political scandals will continue to be measured against the Watergate standard. When leaders face accusations of wrongdoing, journalists, investigators, and citizens will ask whether obstruction or cover-ups are occurring. The Watergate playbook remains the reference point. Medium confidence. Debates about executive power and accountability will reference Watergate in future constitutional crises. As presidents test the boundaries of their authority, Watergate serves as both warning and precedent. The scandal demonstrated that impeachment is possible, though it remains rare and politically costly. Low confidence. Complete consensus about Watergate's lessons may never emerge. Some Americans still view the scandal primarily as a political witch hunt, while others see it as proof that the system works. These competing interpretations reflect deeper disagreements about government power, media responsibility, and political loyalty. The factual record is clear, but its meaning remains contested. Outro and CTA Watergate proved that in America, eventually, the truth comes out. The process was messy, painful, and took 2 years. But security guards, journalists, judges, and ordinary citizens all played a role in demanding accountability. If you want to understand how investigative journalism works in the modern age, watch our next video, All the President's Men: How 2 Reporters Took Down a President. It breaks down exactly how Woodward and Bernstein followed the money and cracked the conspiracy. Source notes and untold thieves. Disclaimer: this script draws from Senate Watergate Committee reports, federal court records, the National Archives Nixon tape collection, contemporaneous reporting from the Washington Post and other news outlets, and books by participants including John Dean, Bob Woodward, and others. Some details remain disputed among historians. New information occasionally emerges as documents are declassified. This script represents the mainstream historical consensus as of 2025 and aims for factual accuracy while acknowledging areas of ongoing debate.